Hello and welcome to the Horizonte Minerals Shareholder Update Call. Throughout this, all participants will be in listen-only mode, and afterwards there'll be a question and answer session. So today I'm pleased to present Jeremy Martin, CEO. Please begin.
Good morning and welcome to the Horizonte Call. First of all, I would just like to wish everybody a belated Happy New Year. There won't be a presentation for this call, but the broad areas that we're going to cover today is a snapshot of the company for any new investors, a summary of 2019 and deliverables that we achieved last year, a look at the nickel market for 2020, and then talk about the project milestones for both Araguaia and Vermelho, and a wrap-up Q&A session. So for those that are not familiar with the company, we're dual listed on the London Stock Exchange and the main TSX in Canada. We're focused in Brazil. We are a pure play nickel company. We have two core assets. We have the Araguaia ferronickel project, which we released a feasibility study on, and now we are moving through to construction ready stage. And we have the Vermelho nickel cobalt project that we acquired from Vale in 2018, and we released a pre-feasibility study on Vermelho last year. Both assets show robust economics at today's nickel price. The key driver between these two assets is they are within trucking distance of each other. So Araguaia has the potential to produce initially 14,000 tonnes of nickel on the stage 1 plant, which can be scaled up to 28,000 tonnes of nickel, and Vermelho has the potential to produce around 25,000 tonnes of nickel. So between Vermelho and Araguaia, we have the potential to produce 50 to 60,000 tonnes of nickel a year, which would make this a significant global nickel producer. So that's the background to the company. These assets are located in a mining region. We're up in the north of Brazil, located around the Carajás mining district, which will be, in the next 2 years, the largest mining district in Brazil. And the major upsides to being in a mining district are obviously the infrastructure. It's got very good road networks. We've got hydroelectric power, rail, and this region really understands and is driven by mining. If we look at 2019, it was a very busy year for the company. We started the year with the award of the construction license for Araguaia. We then moved into a royalty process, and the objective there was to advance Araguaia and effectively look at a non-dilutive funding source. We ran a full royalty process, and we were successful, and we were able to negotiate a $25 million upfront cash payment royalty with Orion Mine Finance. Orion Mine Finance are one of the largest global private equity players in the market today. They manage around $6 billion. And as a result, we are very pleased to be working with them, and are likely to see Orion play in the next stage of the project finance piece. Later in the year, we released a pre-feasibility study on the Vermelho nickel cobalt project. This was designed to demonstrate a lower capex scenario than originally envisaged by Vale. It's worth recapping that Vale actually gave the construction go-ahead on Vermelho in 2005, and it was going to be their flagship nickel cobalt operation. The negatives with that study was that it was a large capex, and it was basically a project designed to be built by a major mining company. So we re-engineered that to a smaller footprint, lower upfront capital. It has a large mine life. It has a plus 30-year mine life. And on our base case economics, it returned a 26% IRR and over $1.5 billion of NPV. So it's an extremely large cash generative project. And over that mine life, it generates over $7 billion of free cash flow. And then later in the year, we announced the hire of project director, Pedro Rodriguez. We welcome Pedro to the team. He has delivered a number of major mining projects in South America, most recently MMG in Peru on their Las Bambas project. And since his joining the team in late Q4, we've now built out a full owners team with the engineering capability to implement the project on the owner's side. So it was a busy year, and now moving into 2020. First of all, a look at the nickel market. Nickel had an extremely volatile year last year, starting the year at the sort of pricing that we're seeing today, $12,000–13,000 a ton, and then running up to highs of $17,500–18,000 a ton mid-year, and actually then retreating back down to 13–14 range at the end of the year. So the average nickel price for 2019 was $13,800 a ton, overall up 6% on 2018. If we look at inventory levels, again, starting last year, we were sort of at around the 200,000 tons on the LME, and by the end of the year, we were drawn down to around 70,000 tons on the LME. So a sharp drawdown, and that's subsequently been reversed as we move into 2020. So inventory levels today on the LME are around 190,000 tons, and we've seen pricing sit at the sort of 13.5 level. I think if we look forward to this year, and we look at sort of general price predictions, if we look across consensus pricing for the next 2 to 3 years, I think across 20 of the major banks, the average price consensus pricing for 2020 is around 15,900. As we move into 2021, that increases to 16,160. And then the long-term price across those banks is 16,370. So step up on where we sit today, and that's principally driven, again, by the stainless steel market, where around 70% of all nickel is used today. Actually, if we look at overall consumption of nickel last year, it hit 2.4 million tons, which was 6% up on the year. And by 2025, that's going to grow to 2.84 million tons. So we are going to see steady increases going forwards. And the big driver in the background is obviously the EV battery market. And recent market data is showing that predictions of around 40 million electric vehicles by 2040, up from around 3 to 4 million vehicles today. And what that means for nickel, if we look out to 2030, it's around 500,000 tons of new supply. And by 2040, that's over 1.5 million tons of new supply. So we are going to see some fairly challenging situations developing on the supply side. And we're going to see the EV battery market start to take a significant market share, which is currently led by stainless steel, alongside stainless steel growing at around 4 to 5% year on year. So the overall demand picture is positive. And we have to remember that Araguaia has a 2-year construction phase. So we are going to be looking out to those long-term prices when Araguaia comes online, plus $16,000 a ton. And all of our base case modeling was done at $14,000 a ton. So this is a rare project where you don't need future nickel pricing. Araguaia returns good financial returns on nickel price today. If we move across to the Araguaia project and milestones for 2020, we are currently advancing the engineering, and that's the main focus for the engineering team. And what does that mean? That means taking the project from feasibility study level to implementation ready. So across all of the areas of the plant, we're increasing the engineering design, foundation designs, steel work, going into the market and updating and getting detailed pricing for areas that was factored in the feasibility study, detailed engineering on the power line, the same on the logistics, looking at detailed logistics, inflow, outflow into ports, etc., and down to the project. So it's really about taking the engineering from 20% up to 30% and having all major equipment packages specified with final contracts ready to execute on closing of the project financing. So that's going to take the first half of the year on the project. There will be a number of milestones that we were able to announce to the market as part of the engineering piece. And then the other focus of the work is obviously on the project finance. This is broken into a number of areas. The first piece would actually be the commercial debt, which would be the commercial lenders. We have 5 international banks, and we have 4 Brazilian banks as part of that overall syndicate grouping. We have had strong interest across those banks, and the message is that there are very few construction-ready nickel projects that are in the mid-capex range. These groups are obviously, the international groups are comfortable with Brazil, and we've seen a definite pickup in interest over the last quarter from the Brazilian banks. Last year, we had 2 Brazilian banks, and we're now 4 to 5 Brazilian banks. And the appetite for looking at assets like this has definitely increased, which is positive. So that's the international and the local project finance piece. We're getting good indications in terms of level, either debt levels that these banks are prepared to invest at, and also alignment on nickel price assumptions used across the various groups. The next piece of the project finance piece is the offtake, and we are talking to a number of groups on offtake options. We're currently focused on export credit agency financing around offtake, and then that will roll out into broader market-led offtake, closing out the balance as we move into the final finance package. And then there's obviously the equity piece, and we are engaged with a number of groups around the equity funding structure. So overall, making good progress. There will be milestones out over the next quarter or 2 quarters in terms of various appointments, and obviously milestones as we pass through due diligence, etc. We have 2 back-to-back banking visits down to the site kicking off, and that will obviously lead into the more detailed process beyond that. So our aim is that we have a full financing package in place mid-year into Q3, and then straight off the back of that, we are ready to start implementation. So there's a lot going on around Araguaia. And then on the Vermelho project, this year is focused on advancing the permitting. When we acquired the project, all of the permits had essentially been archived by Vale. So we have some very good baseline data, and we should be able to advance Vermelho fairly rapidly up to being fully permitted. And the next phase on the actual technical side is taking that project through to full feasibility. We will be exploring options around funding partners for that project, and that is ongoing as well. So really, this is a short update. To conclude, we feel that the nickel price environment and the fundamentals around the nickel market are compelling. We've got the right price assumptions. We've got the right price in the market to support the development of Araguaia. We're getting very positive signs on all of the pieces of the project finance process, and we are on target to deliver our overall objectives for 2020. With that, I would like to open up to any questions that we have.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, can you please press 0 and then 1 on your phone keypad now in order to enter the queue, and then after I announce you, just ask that question. And if you find that question has been answered before it's your turn to speak, just press 0 and then 2 to cancel. And there'll be a brief pause while the questions are being registered. Okay, our first question is over to the line of James Bell at RBC Capital Markets. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Yep, good morning, and thanks for the call and the update. Just two questions. Firstly, at Araguaia, when you look at the capital and operating cost projections, do you see any upside risk there, given kind of changes we've seen in the macro, as you look to finalize your numbers on that side? And secondly, on the financing, can you talk about what you're targeting in terms of a mix between debt and equity around that funding package? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the questions there. In terms of our costs around the project, I think our view at the moment is the CapEx target is still valid, and we're working towards that CapEx target in a definitive cost estimate, and a similar number on the OpEx costs. I mean, some of the numbers and costs in Brazil have moved around. But broadly, we're still targeting the numbers that we have in the feasibility study. Moving on to the project finance, again on the PF debt, we're looking at around 60 to 65%, and the indications so far that is potentially achievable. And obviously the balance then is equity, offtake, and a combination of any of those areas.
Okay, that makes sense. And then just, I know you've got an approved social and environmental impact assessment in place, but as you move ahead, is there anything you have to do in terms of further consultation around communities or environmental or land acquisitions, or are you advanced in that and you don't see that causing any delays if you do get the package finalized by Q3?
I think that as part of getting your construction license, there are a number of conditions that you have to continually to maintain. So we've got an ongoing, and that's one of the areas I probably should have touched on in more detail. We've got a very active environmental and social program for 2020 into 2021. So effectively, it will touch on all of those areas that you've covered. Increased social programs around the project. Maintaining those environmental conditions as part of the licensing. But no, we don't see any red flags or roadblocks on that journey. I mean, it's always got to be a 360-degree view, and it's a changing environment. But as we sit today, we're on track to be able to be implementation ready, subject to closing the financing.
Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is over the line of Mr. Colin Taylor. Please go ahead, your line is open.
Hello, Jeremy. Just a question about the catalysts. I remember in your interview with Crux last year, I think it was, you were talking about the PFS for Vermelho being a catalyst, or you were expecting it to be a catalyst, and obviously didn't actually end up affecting the share price at all. And with a view to the comments about requiring like 100 million market cap to be sort of within the realms of the sort of interest that you would hope for, can you just comment on what future or near-term catalysts are likely to be at play, if any?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always challenging to predict what catalysts are going to move a share price, and I think the challenge we had when we released the Vermelho PFS is that the nickel price was sort of coming back off its big run up that it had, and obviously you can't always align your kind of milestones with where the market's at. So I think the back end of last year was a challenging market in the nickel environment and the equity space in general. So looking to 2020, I think the big catalyst that we see will be milestones around financing. So that will be mandating of banks, it will be signing of offtake agreements, and it will be milestones on the equity, whether that's with existing or new equity holders coming into the overall package. So there will be a number of milestones around financing, which I think is what the market wants to see. They want to know, is this project financeable? We will have milestones around the project as we complete those advanced engineering stages. and we will also have news around advancing Vermelho. So there will be a number of catalysts over the next 6 to 8 to 12 months. How they are reflected in the share price will obviously be a function of where the market's at in parallel with that.
Sure. Just on a tangent, are you able to let us know if there's been any interest on Vermelho from Tesla? I understand they want to go for vertical integration right back to raw materials. Any interest from Tesla at all?
We haven't had a direct call from Tesla, but we will be later this quarter visiting a number of the global battery manufacturers. So I think it's one of these. Let's see how that evolves.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next question is over to Mr. Simon May. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Morning, Jeremy. Just wondering, what sort of target price do we see equity being raised at?
I think that's always a difficult question to answer, and it really will depend upon what the final project finance package looks like and who those equity investors are. So I'm not going to give you a price. Obviously, our objective is to minimize shareholder dilution, and a good example of that was the royalty transaction that we completed with Orion, and that would have been equivalent to raising equity at around 12 to 14p on that $25 million. So, I mean, obviously, if we're faced with a situation where we get to mid-year and share prices have not reacted, we need to look at alternative options, and equally we need to look at what is the best value driver in the long term for this overall project and company.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Okay, before going on to the next one, which is, I believe, Mr. Robert Lamsdale, if anyone else has any further questions at this stage, please do press 0 and then 1 on your phone keypad. So, Mr. Lamsdale, over to you. Your line is open.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Jeremy. Right, the questions I wanted to ask have already been asked, but on Vermelho, you've got a capex of around $600 million. Other people seem to think that it's difficult to bring those sort of HPAL projects in for less than $1 billion. But you've benchmarked Vermelho really against Sumitomo's Coral Bay, and I wondered what it was about about Vermelho that you thought would be able to benchmark it in that way. Is it the technical abilities of Sumitomo, or is it the sort of ore makeup or grade? Was it Vermelho, or was it both of those?
I think that's a good question, and I did actually see that reference point that you're talking to. I think what you have to look at, when you look back at historic HPAL projects, the two big ones, Batavi and Goro, which are often a reference point for significant capital overrun, were greenfield projects. So they were in countries and in parts of those countries with no infrastructure at all. So it's not just the mine site, it's the port, it's the plant, it's the power, which obviously accounts for a significant portion, probably in both of those projects, over 50% of the capex. Why Vermelho is slightly different is you have all of the infrastructure in place. So you're not talking about an integrated greenfield project. I mean, we have a 3-lane tarred highway 2 kilometers from the project. And that's very much a function of my earlier statement about being in a mining district. So the overall infrastructure component that makes up a large portion of the capex on these mega HPAL projects is not relevant to us. And then you have to look at the cost of the overall equipment packages. Those have come down. Sumitomo actually executed that first stage on that project over 25 years ago. Sumitomo are probably one of the leaders in that space, and obviously they would be one of the groups that we would be looking to talk to around the technology angle on this. But we, in our pre-feasibility study, were conservative on the capex. We didn't go to Chinese equipment, and we feel that number is achievable when benchmarked on costs that people are looking at today. And I think what will be interesting is the HPAL technology now is nearly 30 years old. It will be interesting to see what the cost point is on some of these new projects that are planned by the Chinese and Indonesia. And I think you'll see a very different cost picture developing on the next generation of HPAL projects.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a couple more questions that have come through. The first is Tyler Broder at RBC. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Great, Ed. Thanks very much for the call, Jeremy. Hope you're well. The question I have is, it's not very common to see, and it's not a bad problem to have at all, but having two major projects that have as much return potential, both north of 25% IRR. I guess just from my perspective, once you really start going on Araguaia after mid-year, is this going to be the right structure to progress Vermelho in? I guess, could you just maybe comment on how you sort of see that second project developing within this construct?
A good question. I think, and one we're conscious of as well, that we do, as you say, have two very significant projects. And if you look at the Australian peer group of nickel cobalt projects, Vermelho has the ability to generate similar value to any one of those individual companies. So our focus is obviously to finance and develop Araguaia, and we need to ensure that Vermelho doesn't become a distraction in that process. But equally, we need to demonstrate and start building some value in Vermelho. So our focus is keeping both assets in the company at this stage, and that comes back to this scalable production scenario. We've worked hard over the last 8 years to build up over 350 million tons of resource base between Araguaia and Vermelho. And I think if we are successful in delivering a fully functioning RKEF plant at Araguaia, you mustn't forget that the ore at Vermelho can go either process route. So it can either be trucked into the RKEF plant or have a second RKEF plant, or you can send it down the HPAL route to produce sulfate. So I think the focus is keeping the portfolio together at this stage, because to be able to offer 50 to 60,000 tons of incremental nickel production that's 100% owned into trucking distance is a pretty unique offering. Now, if going forwards we see a transaction that drives separate intrinsic value into Vermelho, we will obviously look at it. But I think at this stage, the intention is to keep the asset base together, but we will look at transactions as they come up on a case-by-case basis.
Well, fair enough. Thanks very much.
Okay, we have a final question over the line of Sasha Sethi. Please go ahead, sir. Your line is open.
Thank you. Hello, Jeremy. I just thought I'd ask about permitting for the various both projects and how we're getting on there, and if everything seems to be running according to schedule, and what your next permits that you're looking to advance are at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. So Araguaia is fully permitted to construct. So we can start construction on Araguaia today.